She didn't go to the hospital. She couldn't afford the time. At 2 in the morning, with a kitchen cabinet lying broken on the floor and blood soaking through her sleeve, Elena Ashcroft sat down at her desk, bit down on a folded dish towel, and stitched her own arm shut with a curved needle and surgical thread she kept in the back of her bathroom drawer. She finished the quarterly report by 4:15, submitted it by 4:30. Then she passed out on her keyboard with dried blood on her fingertips and a perfect balance sheet on the screen. If this story breaks your heart, good. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let me see how far this woman's story has traveled. The morning started the way most of Elena Ashcroft's mornings started, without ceremony, without warmth, without anyone asking if she was all right. She was up before 6. The alarm hadn't gone off yet. Her body had been waking itself before dawn for so many years that the habit had calcified into instinct. She sat up from the keyboard with a crease pressed deep into her left cheek, the kind that took 20 minutes to fade, and she registered the pain in her arm the way a person registers a car alarm on a street they don't live on. Background noise. Inconvenient. Not her immediate problem. The immediate problem was the coffee maker, which had stopped working sometime in the night. She stood in the kitchen in her undershirt and stared at it for a long moment, then filled a pot on the stove and waited. The broken cabinet door was still on the floor where it had fallen. She had not moved it. She had not moved anything. The blood on the linoleum had dried to a dark brown, and the sight of it made her jaw set in the particular way it did when she was cataloging damage, the way she might look at a discrepancy in a set of accounts. Problem identified. Problem contained. Move on. She changed the bandage standing at the bathroom sink. The wound was clean, considering. 6 stitches, neat enough, the edges holding. She had packed it with gauze the night before and taped it flat, and now she unwound the old dressing with the steady, economical movements of a woman who had done things like this before. Not often. Enough. She did not let herself think about how long the cabinet door had been broken. She did not let herself think about the fact that no one had fixed it, because no one existed to fix it, because she had made certain years ago that the circle of her life was small enough that breakdowns like this one, domestic, personal, structural, could be managed without witnesses. She was 31 years old, and she lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in the financial district with a broken cabinet and a kitchen floor she hadn't properly mopped in 6 weeks, and a bathroom mirror that had a crack along the lower left corner that she had stopped noticing. She had a job she was exceptional at. She had a bank account that reflected exactly what her salary was supposed to look like. No more, no less, managed with the same precision she applied to everything else. She had no one she called in an emergency. The arm throbbed quietly as she wrapped fresh gauze over it. She finished, pulled her sleeve down, and went to make coffee. She made it to the Armand Group's building on Mercier Street by 7:53, which was 7 minutes earlier than required, and 45 minutes after most of the fourth-floor analytics team had already arrived. Elena was not the first one in. She was never the first one in, because she was always the last one to leave. And even she needed 4 hours of something approximating sleep. The Armand Group occupied the top 3 floors of a 40-story building made of glass and old money. On the surface, it was a private investment and portfolio management firm. It had a receptionist who wore her hair in an immaculate chignon and signed for deliveries with a kind of institutional serenity. It had a lobby that smelled like leather and climate-controlled air. It had a quarterly earnings document that Elena had finished at 4:15 that morning, which she now carried in a manila folder tucked under her left arm, her good arm, with the same careful neutrality she carried everything. She had been with the Armand Group for 2 years and 8 months. She had been told, when she was first recruited through a contact she no longer maintained, that the position required exceptional discretion. She had been told the compensation was extraordinary. She had been told that her direct superior was demanding, exacting, and not interested in people who needed things explained twice. She had not been told, not in so many words, what kind of organization she was actually entering. But Elena Ashcroft was a financial analyst. She was very good at reading what numbers did not say out loud, and she had understood within her first 3 weeks exactly what kind of firm the Armand Group was. She had not quit. She had not panicked. She had done what she always did. She had assessed the risk, measured it against the reality of her circumstances, and kept her head down and her work immaculate. There was a logic to it that people who had never been desperate would find difficult to follow. Elena understood it completely. She was at her desk by 8 o'clock. The quarterly report went to the senior operations director, a compact, humorless man named Brennan, who acknowledged its receipt with a single nod. Elena opened her laptop, pulled up the morning's first set of accounts, and got to work. The arm ached steadily. She ignored it. The fourth floor was open plan, all clean lines and muted tones, the kind of office design that communicated seriousness without trying to communicate warmth. There were 11 people on Elena's floor, and she had professional relationships with all of them that she maintained with a precise and deliberate friendliness. Pleasant, efficient, never personal. She knew who took milk in their coffee and who was going through a divorce, not because she cared particularly, but because knowing things about people was a form of situational awareness. And Elena's situational awareness was finely tuned enough that it had saved her from several uncomfortable situations in her first year. She did not have friends here. She had not had friends anywhere in a long time. It wasn't a wound she touched often enough to know if it still bled. The morning moved the way mornings at the Armand Group moved, with the low, focused hum of people doing difficult work inside of a machine they understood not to examine too closely. At 10:15, Brennan came to her desk and told her the principal wanted the Q3 projections restructured. Elena nodded and asked 2 clarifying questions. Brennan answered them and left. She restructured the Q3 projections. She did not eat lunch. She did not go anywhere she did not need to go. Lucien Armand came to the 4th floor twice a month, and when he did, the atmosphere changed. It was not anything as simple as fear, though fear was certainly present. More of a collective recalibration, the way a room full of people collectively straightened without deciding to. He was 43, tall, lean in the way of men who had been physically hard for a long time, rather than men who worked at it. His face was not handsome in any conventional sense, too angular, too still, a face that gave almost nothing away and seemed to be making a considered decision about how much it would give away even when relaxed. He dressed well, always, spoke quietly, did not raise his voice. Elena had been in the same room as him perhaps 20 times in 3 years. She had presented directly to him 4 times. Each time she had noted that he listened, genuinely listened, the way very few people with his level of power bothered to, and that he asked exactly the right questions, and that he watched her in a way that made her uncertain whether she was being evaluated or merely studied. She had concluded it was probably both, and had not found this particularly threatening. She was used to being watched. She was used to being evaluated. She was less used to the sensation that the person doing it was actually seeing her, and she had noted this reaction in herself and then set it on a shelf where she kept things she did not presently intend to examine. He came through the 4th floor at 11:40 that morning and stopped at Brennan's office for 12 minutes. Elena kept working. She was aware of his presence in the peripheral way she was aware of most things, catalogued, noted, not dwelt upon. She did not expect him to come to her desk. He did. She heard him stop behind her and she turned, not startled. She had learned a long time ago not to show startle, and found him standing 3 feet away with his hands in his pockets, watching her with that particular stillness that she had never quite gotten used to and had never said so. "Ashcroft," he said. He had a slight accent she had never been able to place, not French despite the name, something older and further south, ground down by years into a faint residue that only surfaced on certain sounds. "Mr. Armand." She straightened. The movement pulled at the wound on her forearm, and she controlled the flinch before it could register on her face. Almost before it could register. His eyes moved down briefly to her arm and back up. She noted that he had noticed. She noted that she minded. "The restructured projections," he said. "You finished them. This morning, they're in the system." "I saw." He looked at her. Just looked at her in that way that made the air in a room feel slightly different. "You submitted the quarterly at 4:30 this morning. The deadline was today. The deadline was noon today." She didn't answer. There was nothing to say to that. She had finished the report when she finished it because finishing it was what she did, and the timeline she had finished it on was her own business. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not warmth, not yet. More like recognition, the subtle readjustment of a man recalibrating an impression he had already formed. He looked down again at her arm, at the very faint discoloration above her cuff, where the gauze had shifted during the morning and the edge of the bandage was just barely visible above the fabric. She felt the air change before he spoke. "When did that happen?" It wasn't quite a question. The flatness of it told her that. Last night. It's handled. You stitched it yourself. She met his eyes. I've done it before. Whatever he was about to say next, and she had the distinct sense that it was something she would not have been expecting, was interrupted by Brennan appearing in the corridor with a phone in one hand and an expression on his face that said the call was the kind that did not wait. Lucien Armand looked at Brennan, then back at Elena, and the moment sealed itself shut. My office, he said. Not to Brennan, to her. 3:00. He walked away. Elena turned back to her screen. The arm throbbed. She pressed her elbow against the edge of the desk until the sensation steadied, and then she kept working. She arrived at the executive floor at 2:58 and was kept waiting for 4 minutes. Not the kind of waiting that was meant to assert dominance, but the kind that came from a man whose attention was genuinely and completely occupied. His assistant, a quiet man in his 50s named Voss, who had the eyes of someone who had seen things he did not speak about, showed her in without ceremony. The office occupied a corner of the building and had windows on 2 walls. The view was the kind of thing that would have made most people stop and absorb it. Elena did not stop. She crossed to the chair across from his desk and sat, set her portfolio on her knee, and waited. Lucien came in 2 minutes later. He shrugged off his jacket, hung it with the automatic precision of a man who kept order in small things the way other men kept it in large ones, and sat across from her. He put a first aid kit on the desk between them. Elena looked at it, then at him. Sleeve, he said. Mr. Armand, this isn't Elena. He said her first name with the same flatness he used for everything else, which somehow made it feel more direct than if he had weighted it. Sleeve. She looked at him for another second. Then she rolled up her sleeve. He was quiet while he worked. He cut the old dressing off with the small medical scissors from the kit, examined the stitches. She caught the slight compression of his mouth, which was not pity, but was something that was its neighbor, and cleaned the wound with antiseptic without commenting on the fact that she had done the stitching with the right-hand needle angle of someone doing it on themselves, awkwardly, in the middle of the night, without adequate light. He dried it. He dressed it properly with the focus of a man who had performed this function before, on himself and possibly on other people, in circumstances she did not need to imagine too clearly. He didn't ask her why she hadn't gone to a hospital. She thought that he understood exactly why, and that the question would have cost her something she didn't want to spend in front of him. When he finished, he set the kit aside and leaned back in his chair. He looked at her arm, then at her. You live on Delaney Street, he said. She went still. You know where I live. I know where all my people live. I'm not... She stopped herself. Not the right sentence. Try it again. I'm an analyst. You're the best analyst in this firm by a margin that is not even close, he said. You have been for over a year, and I have been remiss in not acknowledging that. He said it like a man correcting an accounting error, not emotionally, factually. The cabinet. She blinked. Excuse me? The cabinet that fell. In your kitchen. She was quiet for a moment. She did not know how he knew that, and she suspected that trying to ask would not produce a satisfying answer. It's fine. It isn't, he said. Someone will go tonight. They'll fix it, and anything else that needs fixing. You don't need to... I'm not asking. She looked at him. He looked back at her. There was a difference she had begun to understand between the silence Lucien Armand used to intimidate and the silence he used to simply be present, and this particular one, was the second kind. She had not known what to do with it when she first encountered it. She was not certain she knew now. All right, she said, because there was nothing else to say. He nodded, and then, without ceremony, he reached for the folder on his side of the desk and opened it, and they spent the next 90 minutes going through the Q3 projections together. He pushed on 3 assumptions she had made. She defended 2 of them and conceded the third, which was genuinely weaker, and he accepted the concession with the quiet acknowledgement of a man who understood that being right mattered more than winning. They drank coffee that Voss brought without being asked. They did not speak about anything other than the work. When she stood to leave, the sun had dropped below the window line and the room was lit differently, amber and long. She tucked her portfolio under her arm, the good one now, the rebandaged one, and she paused at the door for a reason she couldn't immediately name. "Mr. Armand." He looked up. "Thank you," she said. "For the—" She gestured faintly toward her arm. He nodded once, the way a person nods when a thing is understood and does not require further language around it. She left. In the elevator going down, she stood very still with her back against the wall, and she was aware of a sensation that she could not immediately categorize, something quiet and almost dangerous, like a door she had forgotten was there, cracking open just enough for air to get through. She looked at her own reflection in the polished metal panel of the elevator doors and recognized the expression on her face. It was the expression of a woman who was beginning to see something she had decided she would not look at. She looked away before the doors opened. The men who came to fix her apartment that evening were efficient and silent and gone by 9 o'clock. They replaced the cabinet, fixed the hinge on the bathroom door she had been manually lifting to close for 4 months, and repaired the crack in the kitchen wall behind the stove that she had stoppered with a rolled-up paper towel, and told herself she would deal with later. They did not ask her anything. She sat at her desk with her laptop open and worked and pretended they were not there, and mostly succeeded. After they left, she stood in her kitchen and looked at the space where the broken cabinet had been. The new one was solid, level, exactly where it should have been. She stood there for longer than she meant to. 3 weeks after the afternoon in his office, she found the discrepancy. It was late, not 4 in the morning. Late, just past midnight late, the kind of hour that in Elena's life functioned as mid-afternoon. And she was running a cross-referential audit on a subsidiary ledger that she was not, technically, required to audit. She had begun doing this 6 months earlier, quietly, as a habit born of the same instinct that made her stitch her own arm and keep surgical thread in her bathroom drawer. The instinct that said that if something went wrong, the cost of being unprepared was higher than the cost of preparation. The discrepancy was 0.003%. In a firm the size of the Armand Group's financial operation, 0.003% was the kind of error that could be a rounding issue, a system lag, a misclassified account allocation. Elena looked at it the way she looked at everything that didn't add up, not with alarm, not immediately, but with the flat, cold attention of a woman who had learned that the smallest things were sometimes the ones that held the most weight. She traced it. She followed it through 3 layers of ledger, across 2 subsidiary structures, into a holding entity she had not previously had reason to examine. And then she followed it further. By 1:45 in the morning, the arm was throbbing again from the angle she was sitting, and she hadn't moved in over an hour. And the number she was looking at on her screen was not 0.003%. It was $4.7 million. She sat back. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the screen again because numbers did not change because you looked away from them, and this number was still there. $4.7 million, moved in increments so precise and so deliberate and so carefully structured around the organization's own reporting cadence that whoever had designed the extraction knew the system from the inside, had known it for, based on what she was now reading, somewhere close to 2 years. Elena Ashcroft sat in the blue-white light of her screen at 1:45 in the morning with a throbbing arm and a rebuilt kitchen cabinet and a sensation in her chest like standing on ice and hearing it begin to shift beneath her feet. She could close the window. She could flag it as a rounding anomaly, log it in the error register, and never open this particular thread again. She could keep her head down and her work immaculate and her circle small and her survival intact. She looked at the screen for a long time. Then she opened a new document and began to compile the evidence, and somewhere in the building where she worked, someone who had been stealing from Lucien Armand for 2 years was sleeping without knowing that the quiet woman in the corner of the 4th floor had just found every thread they had ever pulled. Elena did not sleep. She told herself she would stop at 2 o'clock and sleep for 4 hours and return to it in the morning with fresh eyes, the way a rational person would. She told herself this at 2 o'clock, and then at 2:40, and then at 3:15. And by 3:40, she had stopped telling herself anything and was simply working, following the money the way a surgeon follows a vein, carefully, without hesitation, knowing that if she stopped in the middle, she would lose the thread entirely. By 4 in the morning, she had 11 pages. By 5:30, she had 22. The extraction schema was elegant in the way that genuinely dangerous things are sometimes elegant, not ornate, not flashy, but structurally sound in a way that revealed deep familiarity with the system being exploited. Whoever had designed it had understood not just the Armand Group's accounting architecture, but the specific rhythm of its reporting cycles, the particular windows when large transfers would be absorbed into legitimate operational noise, the precise classification codes that would cause the amounts to register as routine intercompany settlements rather than outflows. This was not someone who had studied the system from the outside. This was someone who lived inside it. Elena printed nothing. She saved nothing to the shared network drives. She built the documentation on an encrypted personal drive she had purchased with cash 8 months earlier for reasons she had at the time told herself were purely precautionary. She was beginning to understand that some part of her, the part that had survived things she did not discuss, had been preparing for something like this without fully admitting it. She showered at 6, changed, made coffee on the stovetop, stood at her kitchen window with the mug in both hands and watched the street below come awake. Delivery trucks, a man walking a dog, a woman in scrubs moving fast in the direction of the transit stop. Normal things. People with normal problems. She looked at her rebuilt cabinet. She thought about the man who had ordered it fixed, who had dressed her wound without asking why it existed, who listened when she spoke in a way that most people did not bother to do. Then she picked up her bag and went to work. She did not go to Brennan. Brennan was efficient and loyal and had been with the Armand Group for 11 years, and any one of those facts individually was a reason to trust him. And taken together, they formed the exact profile of a person who, if compromised, would be catastrophically dangerous. She did not go to legal because legal reported through a chain she had not fully mapped. She did not go to anyone on her floor because her floor contained 11 people, and she now knew that whoever was running the extraction had access to operational data that only those 11 people and 6 people above them routinely touched. She went to Voss, not directly. She sent him a message through the internal system that said only, "I need 15 minutes with Mr. Armand today. Time is sensitive." She used the phrasing she had seen used exactly twice in her time at the firm, both times in situations that had resulted in same-day responses and closed-door meetings. The reply came 40 minutes later, 11:15, executive floor. She spent the intervening time at her desk doing her regular work with a steadiness that she maintained through the same mechanism she had used to stitch her own arm, by focusing on the next step only, not the whole sequence, because the whole sequence was too large to hold without flinching. At 11:10, she took the elevator up. Voss met her at the floor entrance and walked her to the office without speaking, which was standard, except that this time he looked at her once as he opened the door with an expression she could not fully read. Somewhere between wariness and something that might have been, in a man with softer features, concern. Lucien was standing at the window when she came in. His jacket was on. He was on the phone, and he held up one finger without turning around, and she sat in the chair across from his desk and set her encrypted drive on the surface in front of her, and waited. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, he put the phone in his pocket and came to sit across from her. He looked at the drive, then at her face, and whatever he saw there caused him to go very still in the way that she had come to understand was not absence of reaction, but the opposite. Full, total, controlled attention. "Talk," he said. "I found an extraction schema in the subsidiary ledgers." She kept her voice flat. Professional. "It's been running for approximately 22 months. The total displacement to date is $4.7 million. Structured across 43 transfer events disguised as intercompany settlements. The design indicates intimate familiarity with the reporting architecture. Whoever built this works inside the organization at a level that has access to operational cadence data." Silence. Lucien looked at the drive. "You documented it. Everything. The trail, the transfer timeline, the shell entity structure they routed through. It's all on there. How long have you been working on this?" "Since approximately 1 in the morning." He looked up from the drive to her face. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't name. "You came directly to me." "Yes." "Not Brennan, not legal." "No." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him process this. Not the information itself, which she could tell he was already moving through with the speed of a man who had spent decades making rapid assessments of threat, but the specific choice she had made. The decision to come to him directly. What it meant about what she understood of the situation and what it meant about what she thought of him. "You know what this costs you," he said, "coming to me with this. I know what it costs me not to. He looked at her for another moment, then he reached out and picked up the drive, and the deliberateness of that gesture. The way he handled it not like an object, but like something with weight, something he understood the value of, told her that he heard what she had not quite said. Leave this with me, he said. Go back to your floor. Do your regular work. Don't speak to anyone about this. Not in the building, not outside it. Don't put anything in writing. Don't change your routine. All right. Elena. He said it the same way he always said her name. Flat, direct, with that faint accent on the first vowel. If the person who built this becomes aware that the trail has been found, the first thing they will do is identify who found it. She held his gaze. I know. Do you get? I work in analytics in an organization where I understand what the organization is, she said. I have understood that for a long time. I'm not frightened of knowing things. He studied her. You should be. Probably, she said. It hasn't stopped me yet. She went back to her floor. She did her regular work. She ate lunch at her desk, which was unremarkable. She answered emails, completed 2 reconciliation reports, attended a 15-minute operations briefing that Brennan ran at 2 o'clock with his usual humorless efficiency. She watched the room. She watched faces. She watched the small, involuntary things that people did when they were carrying something they were not showing, the slightly too careful movements, the fractional delays before answering, the way certain people's eyes went to certain places in the room when they thought no one was looking. She had always been good at watching. She was better at it now, today, with the particular sharp-edged attention of a person who has just stepped into open water and is still calculating whether the current is manageable. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th day, Brennan called her into his office at 10 in the morning and closed the door, which he did not usually do, and told her that Mr. Armand had requested she be moved to the strategic advisory function, effective immediately, with a salary adjustment she should review by end of business. She kept her face exactly where it was. All right. You'll be working directly with his office on financial oversight for several key operational accounts, Brennan said. He was not looking at her quite normally. Something in his regard was off by a fraction, the way a level is off when the bubble is just barely not centered. It's a significant step. I understand. Do you have any questions? No. She went back to her desk. She opened the email with the revised terms, read it, noted that the salary adjustment was 31%, which was not a number that was meant to be turned down. She accepted it with 2 sentences and no punctuation beyond what was required. At 3 that afternoon, Voss appeared beside her desk with the same quiet, materializing quality he always had and told her that the executive floor had arranged a permanent workspace for her adjacent to the senior operations room. She could move her materials that evening if she preferred. She moved them that evening. The new space was smaller than her 4th floor desk, but enclosed, with a door that locked and a window that looked onto the internal atrium rather than the street, and a direct communication line to Lucienne's office that bypassed the general internal system. She set up her laptop, aligned her secondary monitor, positioned her encrypted drive in the left drawer, and sat for a moment in the quiet. She was now effectively inside the wall, between the organization and whatever was eating it from within. She wondered if the person eating it already knew. The answer came 11 days later, at a moment she was not prepared for, which was probably the point. She was in the senior operations room with Lucien and 3 of his senior people. A man named Carver, who ran the Eastside logistics operations. A woman named Price, who oversaw the legitimate business portfolio. And a second man named Osso, who had the physical bearing of someone whose primary function was not financial. They were reviewing Q4 projections. Elena was presenting the structural summary she had prepared. Standing at the display board with a laser pointer, she was not entirely comfortable holding because it was the kind of prop that made her feel performed. And she had just finished the second section when her phone buzzed on the table. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and then again 3 times in rapid succession. Lucien looked at the phone, then at her. Take it. She picked it up. The messages were from a number she did not recognize, and they contained, in sequence, the address of the apartment she had lived in before the current one, which she had not given to anyone at the Armand Group, the name of the hospital she had gone to 3 years earlier after a situation she had never discussed with anyone connected to her current life, and a photograph. The photograph was of her, taken from a distance, sometime in the last 48 hours. She was at her building entrance. She was carrying groceries. Her face did not change. She set the phone face down on the table with the deliberateness of placing a card. "Problem?" Carver said. He had a flat, watchful voice and small eyes that calculated things. "No," Elena said. She picked up the laser pointer. Section 3. She finished the presentation. She answered the questions that followed. She accepted the coffee that Voss brought in at some point and drank half of it and set it down. She did all of these things with the same quality of stillness she had used to stitch her own arm, by staying in the next step, only the next step, because the step after that was too large to look at directly. When the meeting ended and Carver and Price and also filed out, she stayed. Lucien stayed too, which she had not asked for but also had not needed to ask for. The door closed. She turned the phone face up on the table and slid it across to him. He read the messages. He looked at the photograph. His face did not do what most people's faces would have done. What it did instead was go very quiet in a way that was not calm, but was the thing that existed just before whatever came after calm ran out. "When?" he said. "During the meeting." He looked at the phone for another moment. Then he set it down and looked at her, and she recognized the quality of his attention now because she had been learning its gradations over the past weeks. This one was the version he used when he had made a decision and was now moving, and the decision was not reversible, and he was not looking for input on it. "You're not going back to Delaney Street tonight," he said. "I have work." "Elena." She stopped. "You gave me the evidence," he said. "That means you're inside this now, not adjacent to it. Inside." He said it without heat, the way someone states a physical fact. The person who sent those messages wants you to understand that they know who you are. They want you to run or to stay quiet. Either outcome benefits them. She looked at him. "And the third option?" "The third option is you stay close and we find them before they do anything further." Define close. "This building, for now. There's a secured residence on the 38th floor. You'll stay there until this is resolved." She almost said no. The word formed completely in her chest and rose as far as her throat before something stopped it. Not fear, not submission, but the cold, clear, analytical function that had kept her alive in various forms for years, which was now telling her that the risk calculation had shifted and the person who had sent those messages had access to information they should not have, and that the gap between what was comfortable and what was survivable was currently very narrow. "How long?" she said. "Until I know who's inside my organization." She picked up her phone, put it in her bag, thought about her apartment, the rebuilt cabinet, the fixed hinge, the crack behind the stove that was no longer stopped with paper. Thought about her laptop and her drive, and the 22 pages she had compiled at 2 a.m. while the street outside was quiet, and she had not yet understood how loud the silence in her life actually was. "I'll need my equipment," she said. "Voss will send someone tonight." She nodded. Then she looked at him, and the things she had put on the shelf, the things she had noticed in herself and decided not to examine, was harder to keep shelved than it had been before, because there was something in the way he was looking at her that she recognized without wanting to, a quality of attention that was not professional and was not tactical, and was not the way a man looked at an asset he was protecting. She looked away first. "Mr. Armand, Lucien." She stopped. He said it the same way he said everything. Flat, precise, with the quality of a man who did not offer things he did not mean and did not offer them twice. "We've moved past Mr. Armand," he said. She didn't answer. The silence between them was the second kind, the present kind, not the intimidating kind. And she stood in it for a moment with the weight of the last 11 days and the photograph on the phone and the rebuilt cabinet and 22 pages of evidence that had turned her from an analyst into something she did not yet have a word for. "All right," she said. "Lucien." He nodded. He picked up his phone and made a call, and while he was making it, she walked to the window that looked out over the atrium and stood there and breathed in and out deliberately and thought about the woman in the photograph, the one walking to her building with groceries, not knowing she was being watched, and wondered when exactly that woman had stopped being careful enough. Then she thought about Carver in the meeting, with his small flat eyes calculating things she now suspected she knew the shape of, and she understood that whatever came next was not going to be something she could stitch together herself in the dark. She was still standing at the window when Lucien ended the call, and without turning around, she said, "It's Carver." The room went very still. "You said that like you're certain," he said, behind her. "I'm not certain," she said, "but the transfer cadence correlates to the East Side Logistics reporting windows, and the classification codes used in the extraction schema match the operational shorthand that Logistics uses internally. Carver has been with you for how long?" A pause. 7 years. Then he's had 7 years to learn exactly how to hide inside the noise. She turned around. "I'm not certain, but I'm close." Lucien looked at her across the room, and his expression was the most complex thing she had ever seen on his face. Something that was not anger, though anger was somewhere in it, and not grief, though that was in it too, and underneath both of those things was something older and harder that she thought might be the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent his life building things and had learned that the people most capable of destroying them were always the ones who had helped build them. He said nothing. He walked to his desk and picked up his phone again, and she watched him dial a number she suspected was not in any directory, and she thought, this is the moment. Not the photograph, not the evidence, not the conversation in his office with the first aid kit on the table. This is the moment after which nothing goes back to what it was before. And whatever is on the other side of it is something that has to be walked into without knowing what the ground looks like. The phone connected. Lucien said 2 words she did not catch, and then he said Carver's name. And his voice when he said it was as quiet and as final as a door closing in an empty building. And Elena Ashcroft stood in the window light of the 37th floor of the Armand Group and understood that she had just ignited something that could not be put out. And somewhere in the building below them, a man named Carver, who had been stealing for 2 years and sleeping without guilt, was about to learn that the quiet woman everyone overlooked had been watching him the whole time. The 38th floor residence was 4 rooms and a kitchen, and silence so complete that Elena could hear the ventilation system cycling through its pressure changes at 11-minute intervals. She knew it was 11 minutes because she had been awake long enough to count 3 full cycles before she stopped pretending she intended to sleep. She was sitting at the small desk they had cleared for her equipment, her laptop open, the encrypted drive plugged in, the document with her 22 pages of evidence open on the left half of the screen, and a live feed of the subsidiary ledger architecture on the right. She was cross-referencing. She was always cross-referencing. It was the one thing she could do that felt like solid ground. Voss had sent 2 people for her things. They had returned with her equipment bag, 3 days of clothes chosen with a pragmatism she appreciated, and inexplicably, the stovetop coffee pot from her kitchen. She did not know how they had known to take it. She did not ask. She made coffee at midnight. She was still at the desk at 2. What she was looking for now was not the how of the extraction schema, but the when, the specific operational windows that Carver would have needed access to in order to time the transfers as precisely as he had. Because the transfers were precise. The timing was not guesswork. It required live access to the reporting cycle, which meant either Carver was running the extractions himself in real time, or he had a mechanism inside the system that was doing it automatically, and he was only triggering it. The difference mattered. If it was automated, there was a ghost in the architecture, a piece of embedded code or a configured rule that was still running. If it was manual, Carver had to touch it personally every time, which meant there was a behavioral pattern, a physical record, something that could be found and used. She was 3 levels deep into the system's configuration logs when she found something that stopped her. Not evidence of Carver, evidence of access, legitimate, credentialed, time-stamped, from a user account that she knew, that she sat in a meeting with every second Tuesday, that had, according to the log, queried the exact subsidiary ledger Elena had originally flagged at 9:47 on the evening she had first discovered the discrepancy. The account belonged to Price. Elena sat with that for a moment. The ventilation system cycled. Outside, the city made its night sounds 38 floors below, distant and irrelevant. Price had queried the ledger at 9:47. Elena had discovered the discrepancy at approximately 1 in the morning. The gap between those 2 events was 3 hours and 13 minutes. Enough time for someone who had been watching the ledger for any unusual activity to identify that the system had been accessed by an analyst running a non-routine cross-reference, and to begin determining who that analyst was. The photograph had arrived 11 days after Elena brought the evidence to Lucien. 11 days was not a reaction time. 11 days was a preparation time. She closed the configuration log. She opened the access records for the past 30 days and searched for Price's account activity. It took her 40 minutes to map it fully, because the activity was deliberate in its apparent ordinariness. Regular hours, routine queries, nothing that would register as anomalous in a standard audit. But Elena was not running a standard audit. She was running the particular kind of analysis that came from knowing exactly what she was looking for, and what she found was this. Price's account had touched every single one of the 43 subsidiary ledger entries that contained extraction events. Not all at once. Distributed across weeks and months, each access logged as a routine portfolio review. Unremarkable individually. Taken together, a map. It was not Carver. Or rather, it was not only Carver. She sat back. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the meeting. The Q4 projections. Carver and Price and Osso arranged around the table, herself at the board with the laser pointer. And she thought about Price, who had the careful polish of a woman who had spent years learning how to occupy space in a room without being underestimated, who had been with the Armand Group for 9 years, who ran the legitimate business portfolio with a precision that Elena had professionally admired, who had sat in that room and watched Elena present financial data, and had known or suspected and had said nothing. She got up. She went to the window and stood there with her arms crossed, and looked at the city and made herself breathe at a normal rate, because the thing that was happening in her chest right now, the cold, spreading sensation of a plan coming apart at the seams, was not something she could afford to act on without thinking it through. Because here was what the new information meant. Carver was not running this alone. Carver was the operational side, the logistics infrastructure, the east side windows, the transfer mechanism. Price was the cover, the legitimate business portfolio that provided the shell entities with credible commercial activity, the institutional knowledge that made the classification codes plausible, the seniority that kept anyone from looking too closely. 2 people, 7 years and 9 years respectively, which meant between them they had 16 years of access, 16 years of accumulated institutional knowledge, 16 years of learning exactly where the walls were thin. And Elena had named Carver to Lucien. Only Carver. And Lucien had made a call. Quiet, final. The kind of call that set things in motion that did not stop moving until they reached their conclusion. If Price knew, and the configuration log said she was watching, then Price knew that Elena had given Lucien a name. And if Price was smart enough to build a 2-year extraction schema inside one of the most closely guarded financial operations in the city, then Price was smart enough to understand what happened next. Carver gets pressured, Carver panics, and a panicking Carver becomes a catastrophic liability. Elena was at the door of the residence before she fully registered that she had decided to move. She knocked on the interior security door and identified herself, and waited the 40 seconds it took for the overnight detail to confirm and unlock. She took the stairs to the 37th floor. She knocked on the door of the secondary office that Voss had told her Lucien used when he stayed in the building, which was more often than anyone on the 4th floor probably knew. The door opened in under 10 seconds, which told her he had also not been sleeping. He was in a dark shirt, no jacket, and he looked at her face in the way he had, reading it quickly, not the surface of it but what was underneath, and stepped back to let her in without asking. "It's not just Carver," she said. The room was small, a working room rather than a comfortable one, a desk and 2 chairs and a lamp turned low, and the quiet of a building at 2:30 in the morning pressing in from outside. He sat on the edge of the desk. She stayed standing because she couldn't sit right now. Her body was running on something that was not quite adrenaline but was its close cousin, the biochemistry of a person who had found a second floor beneath a floor they thought was already the bottom. She told him. She walked him through the configuration logs, the access records, the distribution of Price's account activity across the 43 events. She showed him on her laptop, turning the screen toward him, pointing to timestamps with her finger rather than the laser pointer she no longer had. She was precise. She was economical. She did not editorialize. When she finished, Lucien was quiet. Not the decision quiet she had learned, something else. Something that was working through something she couldn't see the shape of. "Price," he said finally. "Yes. 9 years. Yes. He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at the wall, and she watched his jaw work once, and she understood that this was what the exhaustion looked like, when the controlled surface of it cracked just enough to let the weight through. He recovered it quickly. But she had seen it. The call I made, he said. Last night. You moved on Carver. I had people bring him in 2 hours ago. She absorbed this. Then Price knows. If they're communicating, yes. He looked at her. And if Price knows Carver is in custody, she runs or she burns it, Elena said. Destroys the evidence, liquidates the shell entities, disappears the money before you can freeze it. She paused. How fast can she move it? Tell me. The shell structure routes through 3 holding entities. If Price has liquidation authority on any of them, which, given her portfolio oversight role, she likely does, she could initiate a full transfer cascade in under 2 hours. The money would be in jurisdictions we can't touch by morning. Lucian picked up his phone. He dialed. It rang twice and went to voicemail, which told Elena everything she needed to know about where Price currently was, which was not asleep in her apartment. He ended the call. He made another, then another. The room had the quality of a space in which a decision had just been made and the air had not yet caught up with it. Elena opened the subsidiary ledger architecture on her laptop and began tracing the shell entities, working forward from the documentation she had compiled to identify which structures Price would have the fastest access to. It was the only thing she could do right now that was useful, so she did it, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the laptop balanced on her knee, because neither of the room's 2 chairs was near an outlet and the cord was not long enough. Lucian on the phone looked down at her on the floor and said nothing, but she felt the look. She found the liquidation pathway at 3:14 in the morning. It was not where she had expected it, not in the primary shell entity she had originally identified, but in a secondary structure that she had not fully mapped because its connection to the extraction schema was indirect, routed through a legitimate commercial vehicle that Price's portfolio division managed. A holding company registered in a jurisdiction with a 14-hour time difference, which meant that the business day there was currently underway, which meant the transfer windows were open. Lucien. She said it without looking up. He was off the phone. He came to where she was sitting and crouched beside her, close enough that she could hear him breathe, and she turned the screen so he could see it. She's going to move it through this one, Elena said. The secondary structure. I missed it in the original documentation because the commercial vehicle is legitimate. Price's division manages it as a real operating entity. But look at the registered signatories, she pointed. Price is the 3rd signatory. She can authorize transactions independently above a certain threshold. What's the threshold? 800,000, and the current balance in the structure. Elena pulled up the account. Her throat did something she controlled before it could become visible. 3.2 million. Lucian straightened up. He made a call and spoke in a low, rapid voice she could not fully follow, giving instructions she understood the shape of, even if she missed the specific language. He was moving money people into position. He was trying to freeze the account before Price could touch it. She kept working. She kept mapping. She was 3 entities deep into the secondary structure when her phone buzzed. She looked at it. The message was from Price's direct number. Not an unknown number this time, not a burner, Price's own professional contact, which was either a mistake or a statement. It was short enough that Elena read it in a single pass and felt the cold spread from her sternum outward to her fingers. It said, "You should have stayed on the 4th floor." She set the phone down on the floor beside her knee with the same deliberateness she had used in the meeting. She looked at the screen. She kept working. Lucien came back. He looked at her face and then at the phone and picked it up and read the message, and the room temperature did not change, but something in it did. "She knows you're here," he said. "She's known since the photograph." "Elena, I'm in the middle of something," she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that, distantly, in the way she was proud of the stitches. Not pleasure, but the simple satisfaction of a thing done correctly under adverse conditions. "Give me 20 minutes. He gave her 20 minutes. He stood somewhere behind her. She could feel the precise location of him, the way you feel a heat source in a cold room. And he made calls in a voice too low to decode, and she mapped the secondary structure and the tertiary structure that connected to it, and the specific authorization pathway Price would use, and the exact sequence of transactions that would need to happen to move $3.2 million across a 14-hour time boundary before morning. At 3:41, she said, "She's already started." The account balance had dropped. Not dramatically. Not a single catastrophic transfer, which would have been flagged automatically. Small moves, just under the automatic reporting threshold, distributed across 4 sub-accounts within the structure. The first transaction had been initiated at 3:22, which was 8 minutes before Lucian had put people in position to freeze the account. 8 minutes. She stared at the screen. She did the arithmetic she did not want to do. The transactions already cleared totaled $940,000. Gone. In jurisdictions that did not cooperate with asset recovery procedures. The remaining $2.2 million was still in the structure, but the freeze order Lucien had initiated was now in a procedural queue, and Price's transactions were moving faster than the queue was processing, and the gap between them was narrow and closing. Can you stop it?" Lucien said behind her. "Not from here, not through normal channels." She looked at the screen, thought about what she was about to say. Said it anyway. "I can reverse the authorization pathway. If I access the structure's internal configuration and modify the signatory thresholds before the next transaction clears, I can lock Price out of the account. But it requires accessing the entity's internal system directly, which means going around the firm's standard access protocols. Do it. It's not..." She paused. "It's not entirely legal." A beat. "Do it," he said again. The same voice, the same flatness, the voice of a man who had stopped weighing the cost of necessary decisions a long time ago and now simply made them. She did it. It took 11 minutes and it was not clean, and she would examine later in some quieter hour exactly what she had crossed and whether it was crossable back. But at 3:52, the signatory threshold on the secondary structure was modified. And at 3:53, Price's next queued transaction failed with an authorization error, and at 3:54, the freeze order cleared its procedural queue and the account locked. $2.2 million secured. $940,000 gone. Elena closed the laptop. She put her hands flat on the floor on either side of it and breathed. The arm that had been stitched in the dark 6 weeks ago ached in the deep way that old wounds did when the body had been running too long on too little. She noticed it the way she noticed most things now. Catalogued, noted, set aside. She became aware that Lucien had crouched beside her again. Not touching, just present, in that specific way he had, the way that did not demand anything but occupied the same space. 2.2, she said. She got 940 out. You stopped the rest. I didn't stop all of it. Elena? His voice was close. She turned her head, and he was there, nearer than she had calculated, and his face in the low light of the desk lamp had the quality of a man who was done performing steadiness and was simply being it, which was different and harder to look at. You stopped the rest. She looked at him. She thought about the fact that somewhere in this building, Carver was in a room answering questions, and somewhere in the city, Price was moving, and the $940,000 was already in the bloodstream of a financial system that would absorb it without trace. And the woman who had sent a photograph to make Elena afraid had succeeded at exactly one thing tonight and failed at the rest. She thought about the 4th floor, the corner desk, the 11 people she had known without knowing, the professional friendliness she had maintained with the precision of a managed account. She thought about the shelf where she had been keeping the things she did not intend to examine. She's not done, Elena said. Price. The money she moved, she needs it to run, which means she's buying time, which means she'll try something else before she runs. She looked at him. She'll come at you, or she'll come at me, one or the other, to create enough disruption to get clear. Lucien held her gaze. I know. I want to be in the room when you find her. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. He did not surprise easily, but a recognition, the specific recalibration she had seen before, the moment when his impression of her updated itself. That's not... I know what it's not, she said. I want to be in the room. He looked at her for a long moment. The ventilation system cycled. Somewhere below them, the city continued its indifferent night. All right, he said. She nodded. She got up from the floor with the careful movements of a body that had been sitting in one position too long, and she picked up her laptop and her phone, and she looked at the message from Price still on the screen. You should have stayed on the 4th floor. and she thought about the woman who had been watching her for 11 days while she sat at her desk and did her work and believed she was still invisible. That woman was gone now. Whoever was standing in this room at 3:55 in the morning with $2.2 million locked and an encrypted drive full of evidence and a name she had just decided to stop keeping at a careful distance, that woman was something else. She did not yet know exactly what. She suspected she was about to find out because at 4:03 her phone buzzed again, and this time the number was not Price's number and it was not an unknown burner. And when she read the message, her blood went cold in a way that was different from the cold of fear, the specific cold of a person who has just understood that the architecture of a situation is not what they thought it was, and the walls they believed were load-bearing are not the walls holding up the ceiling. The message was from Osso. It said, "She didn't run. Check the garage." The stairwell swallowed them. Concrete and fluorescent emergency lighting and the sound of 2 sets of feet hitting each landing with a percussive urgency that the building's architect had never designed for. Elena's lighter, faster, Lucien's heavier, and just behind, and between each landing the specific silence of a building that did not yet know what was happening inside it. Sublevel 2 to 1. Ground. 1, 2, 3. She was breathing hard by the 5th floor and she did not slow down. The laptop bag was hitting her hip on every other step, and she could feel the drive inside it. The physical original, the one Reld had copied from, the one she had pulled back out of his hand when they left the room, pressing against the inside of the bag with a solidity that was almost punishing. She gripped the strap tighter, kept moving. 38th floor was 17 more flights. She knew this the way she knew account balances, immediately, without calculating. At the 14th floor, the stairwell door opened above them, and footsteps came down fast, and her body reacted before her mind did, pulling left against the wall, and Lucien's arm came across in front of her with the automatic precision of someone whose instincts had been calibrated for exactly this kind of moment. The footsteps resolved into one of the overnight security men, young, breathing hard, a radio in his hand, and he pulled up short when he saw them and said to Lucien, "38th is clear. Voss has him." Elena felt the breath leave her in a way that was not quite relief. Clear. Voss has him. The drive had been taken, the copy sent, the server accessed, and someone was in custody, and the 38th floor was clear, and she was 17 floors below it running on stairwell air and adrenaline and the particular fuel source that came from a night in which the ground had shifted 5 times, and she had not yet been able to stop moving long enough to feel how tired she was. Lucien said, "The transfer." "Don't know yet," the security man said. "She said to come get you." She. Elena looked at Lucien. He looked at her. They were both breathing hard and neither of them pretended otherwise, and she saw in his face the same thing she felt in her chest. The incomplete arithmetic, the problem still open, the result not yet in. She turned and went back up the stairs at the same pace. The 38th floor, when they reached it, was 4 people in a corridor that had been built for none. Voss, standing at the residence door with the composed watchfulness of a man who had managed crises before this one and would manage crises after it. Osso, who had come up from somewhere, who had a cut above his eyebrow from the garage and had clearly not stopped to deal with it because the blood had tracked down the side of his face and dried in a line that made him look like something from a different kind of story. A man Elena did not recognize who was standing with the particular posture of a man being stood with rather than standing, and on the floor against the wall, seated with his wrists zip-tied through a wall-mounted pipe bracket, Reld. He looked up when Elena came in. His face had the quality she had seen on Price's face in the garage. The arithmetic completed and the sum coming out wrong, except where Price had had composure on top of it. Reld had only what was left after composure ran out, which was a kind of raw, simplified fear. She looked at the phone in Voss's hand. The phone that had been Reld's phone. The phone with the transfer bar. "How long was it connected before you got to him?" she said. Voss said, "Approximately 4 minutes." She looked at her watch. 4:07 in the morning. She had been staring at the transfer bar at 4:03. 4 minutes. She took the phone from Voss and looked at the transfer log. Destination address. File size transferred. Timestamp. She moved into the residence room and sat at the desk and opened her laptop and plugged in the drive. Her drive, the original. and she began working with the focused speed of someone who understood that the window she was operating in was not infinite and might already be closed and was going to work as if it was not. The external server the transfer had gone to was the same class she had seen used once before in documentation. She had read thoroughly 2 years ago because she had been thorough even then. And what she remembered about that class of server was this. The deposit security was primary, the administrative access security was secondary, and the secondary layer used a validation protocol that had been identified as vulnerable in documentation that circulated in the financial security community in the year before Elena had read it, which meant whoever had built this server had built it before that documentation existed, or had not read it, or had decided the vulnerability was acceptable because no one was going to be looking. Someone was looking. She found the administrative access layer at minute 6. It was exactly where the documentation said it would be, and it was using exactly the protocol the documentation said it would be using. She sat with this for a moment. Not satisfaction, something more like the flat acknowledgement of a thing confirmed, and then she went through it. 3 minutes inside the server's structure. The file was there. The copy of her 22 pages, compressed, time-stamped 403, sitting in the deposit queue waiting for its distribution trigger. She deleted it. Not corrupted, not quarantined, not moved to a recovery-accessible location. Deleted. From the deposit queue and from the server's intake log and from the distribution record that would have triggered the secondary send. She sat back. The laptop fan was running loud. The room smelled like stale air and the particular chemical clean of a space that was maintained but not lived in. And she was aware of her own body in a way she was not usually aware of it. The sweat at the back of her neck, the throb in her left arm that had been there all night and was louder now, the way her hands felt on the keyboard, slightly less steady than they had been 4 hours ago. She looked at the screen, at the deletion confirmation. The copy was gone. She pulled the drive out of the laptop and held it. The physical drive. The original 22 pages and everything she had added to it since, the complete documentation of the extraction schema and the recovery process and the events of the last 11 days. She held it in both hands for a moment like a person holding a thing they have almost lost and have found, and are not yet ready to set down. Lucien came to the doorway. He looked at her face and then at the drive in her hands. "Done," she said. He looked at her for a moment that was longer than it needed to be for confirmation purposes. "Come out," he said. She came out. In the corridor, Reld was still on the floor. The unknown man had been identified during the 4 minutes she was working, one of the overnight building security staff, not Armand Group Security, but the building's contracted service, which was a different chain and a different set of loyalties, and a gap in the organizational architecture that Price had found and used the way she found and used everything. He was not Reld's supervisor or his confederate. He was simply a man who had been in the wrong place with the wrong keycard and had been used as a technical tool rather than a conscious one. Lucien made a decision about him in approximately 15 seconds, speaking quietly to Osso, and the man was escorted to a different room and was going to have a very specific kind of conversation before the morning was out that would result in a specific kind of understanding, and Elena did not need to know the details of that conversation. Reld was the problem that remained. Lucien crouched in front of him, not all the way down, not sitting, crouching, with his forearms on his knees, bringing his eye level to Reld's, in the particular way of a man who understood that physical positioning in a conversation was itself a form of language. Elena stood at the doorway of the residence room and watched. "How long have you been managing the keycard logs for Price?" Lucien said. Reld looked at him. His mouth worked once without producing a sound. "Reld." 8 months, Reld said. His voice had the quality of something deflated. "And before the keycard logs, what else?" A pause. "Access reports. Quarterly. She wanted to know if anyone was running non-standard queries on the subsidiary accounts." He stopped, looked at the floor. "She was going to pay me when she left, when she had enough. She said another 6 months, maybe 8. She was going to leave you behind," Lucien said. "Not cruelty, just information." Reld's jaw tightened. "The contact," Lucien said. "The one the transfer was supposed to go to. I don't know who it was. I just had the server address. Price gave it to me 2 weeks ago. said if anything happened to her before she could leave, I was supposed to copy whatever documentation existed about the accounts and send it there. He looked up. She said it was insurance. She said it would keep both of us safe because if the documentation went public, it would expose the organization, Elena said from the doorway. Reld looked at her. She used you, Elena said. It was not unkind. It was simply the accounting of a situation. She gave you a task and a server address and a story about insurance, and she did not tell you that the documentation you were sending had already been used to trace her and that sending it externally would not protect you. It would simply complete her exit strategy. Reld stared at her. Something moved through his expression that was not quite the arrival of understanding so much as the confirmation of something he had not wanted to confirm. She was going to leave me behind, he said again. Yes, Elena said. The corridor was quiet. Oso had come back from wherever he had taken the building security man and was standing at the stairwell door with the cut on his face still unattended, which Elena noted and which she would address when the conversation with Reld was finished, because it was deep enough to need attention, and she had become, apparently, a person who noticed these things and did something about them. Lucien stood up. He looked at Oso and something passed between them, and then he looked at Elena. I need an hour, he said. She understood what the hour was for. I'll be in the residence. She went back into the room and closed the door most of the way and sat at the desk and did not work. This was unusual enough that she noticed it. The absence of the impulse to open the laptop, to run a figure, to follow a thread. She sat with the drive in her hands, and she listened to the ventilation system cycle, and she let herself be still. The arm was genuinely hurting now. Not the background ache she had learned to work through, but the sharper complaint of a body that had been running on override for too long, and was beginning to insist on being heard. She rolled up her sleeve and looked at the dressing. Intact, dry, holding, and rolled her sleeve back down and held the arm against her body for a moment with the slight pressure that helped and did not help and was what there was. She thought about Price in the garage, the composure that had not broken even at the end of her arithmetic. The 9 years. The 16 years between them, Price and Carver, of access and familiarity and institutional knowledge used like a tool against the institution itself. She thought about the 8-minute gap. The $940,000 that were gone in the bloodstream of a financial system that would not return them. She thought about the dead drop server and the delete confirmation and the copy that no longer existed. She thought about what it meant that she had done those things, the server access, the threshold modification, the administrative override, and whether the person who had done them was the same person who had sat on the 4th floor in a corner desk, keeping everything small and manageable, or whether that person was someone she was not going to find again if she looked. She decided in the quiet of the residence room at 4:30 in the morning that she was not going to look. The hour Lucien took was more than an hour. It was closer to 90 minutes, and when the door opened fully, it was Voss who came in first, which was how she knew the heaviest part of it was done. And behind Voss was Lucien, and behind Lucien was no one, and the corridor when she looked past them was empty. Voss set a fresh cup of coffee on the desk beside her without being asked. He looked at her arm with the careful peripheral vision of a man who noticed things and had learned to act on them quietly. He left and came back with a small medical kit, not the one from Lucien's desk, a different one, a more complete one, and set it beside the coffee. "Thank you, Voss," she said. He nodded, which for Voss was a complete and sufficient expression of several things at once, and he left. She looked at Lucien. He looked like a man who had done something difficult and had done it because it was necessary and had not found the necessity made it easier, which was the specific look of someone who had not stopped being human even after many years of making the kinds of decisions his life required. "Railed," she said. "Handled." He came to sit in the second chair. He sat in it with the weight of a man at the end of something. Price's contact, the server. It was a law firm, external. She had set up a client file. The file would have triggered a disclosure to 3 financial regulators and 2 journalists if the deposit was confirmed. Elena absorbed this. She had legal infrastructure around the exit. She had everything. He said it without admiration and without bitterness, just with the acknowledgement of someone recognizing the full scope of a thing. 9 years to build it. She was going to burn it all on her way out. Yes. The disclosure would have exposed the organization's financial architecture to regulatory scrutiny. Yes. Which would have been worse than the 4.7 million. Much worse. He looked at her. The deletion. The law firm's server? Yes. She understood the question. The files she had set up with them. I can't touch that. That's inside a legitimate legal structure. Client privilege, separate servers, separate chain. Whatever she told her lawyer is still there. Lucienne was quiet. But, Elena said, the trigger for the disclosure was the confirmed deposit from the dead drop server. No deposit confirmation, no trigger. The lawyer's instructions were conditional. She looked at him. The condition wasn't met. He looked at her for a long moment. You thought through all of that in 11 minutes. I thought through the part I needed to think through, she said. The rest I thought through just now. Something shifted in his face. The precursor to the thing she had been watching approach for weeks, getting closer each time she said something that was exactly what it was and nothing more. The specific, unguarded response of a man encountering someone whose mind worked in a way he had not encountered before and had stopped pretending was not significant. The 940, she said. I know. We're not getting all of it back. I know that too. The recovery window depends on the jurisdiction structure price used. Some of it might be accessible through formal channels if we move in the next 72 hours. She looked at the laptop. I'd need to map the holding entities she built for the liquidation cascade. I have most of it from the work I did at 3 a.m., but the secondary structures… Elena. His voice was quiet, but it had the quality that stopped her. It's 4:40 in the morning. She looked at him. The 72 hours, he said, start now. Which means you have until Monday morning. He looked at the coffee Voss had left, then at her. Drink that. Dress the arm properly. The recovery mapping can start at 7. She looked at the coffee. She looked at the medical kit. She thought about the woman who had stitched her own arm at 2 in the morning, rather than stop working because stopping felt like the more dangerous option. And she thought about whether that woman's calculations still held. She picked up the coffee. 7, she said. He nodded. He did not move to leave, and she did not move to indicate that he should, and the room settled into the present kind of silence. Not demanding, not tactical, just present. The two of them on opposite sides of a desk in a residence room at 4:40 in the morning with the specific gravity of a night that was nearly over but not yet. She dressed the arm herself, which she preferred. He watched without commenting, which she preferred. The wound was still clean, still holding, the stitches doing what stitches were supposed to do. She taped the fresh dressing flat and rolled the sleeve back down and picked up the coffee again. Your fiancé, she said. The word sat in the room. That's a conversation for a different time, he said. I know, she said. I'm not asking about the conversation. I'm asking whether she's safe. If Price had intelligence on the organization, she may have had intelligence on personal connections, your fiancé's address, her routines. He looked at her. The recalibration happened. She could see it, the rapid updating of his tactical picture to include a variable he had not flagged. He picked up his phone, made a call that lasted 45 seconds and consisted primarily of listening. Ended it. She's with family, he said. Has been for the last week. A pause. The engagement has not been… He stopped. He tried again with the specific care of a man choosing precision over ease. It has been, for some time, an arrangement of convenience more than anything else. She is aware of this. Elena looked at him. I'm not offering that as an explanation, he said. I know, she said again. The building outside was beginning its pre-dawn shift. The specific quality of air that preceded morning, the slight change in the ventilation's behavior as the external temperature differential decreased. She was aware of this the way she was aware of the 11-minute ventilation cycle, the way she was aware of most things she had trained herself to notice, because noticing had always been her primary tool, and she had never been able to fully turn it off. She noticed the way Lucian sat in the chair, the controlled weight of him, the specific quality of stillness that was not absence of interior movement, but the result of a very long practice at not letting interior movement become exterior expression. She had been reading this for months, learning the gradations of it the way she learned account structures. patiently, thoroughly, attending to the details that most people did not bother with because they seemed self-evident. They were not self-evident. They were the most important figures in the ledger. She thought about what she had been keeping on the shelf. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "The night I found the discrepancy," she said, "I ran a risk assessment." She held the coffee cup with both hands, looking at the middle distance. "Not about the organization, about myself, about whether the cost of what I'd found was worth the cost of doing something about it." She looked at him. "The calculation I ran was about survival. It was the same calculation I've been running my entire adult life, and the same one that keeps the circle small and the exposure low." She paused. "I ran it and I got the same result I always get. Stay small, stay quiet, flag it as a rounding error, and go to sleep." "But you didn't," he said. "No." "Why?" She thought about this. She thought about the truth of it, which was not simple and was not flattering, and was not the version that sounded like courage. "Because the discrepancy was in an account that I'd been watching for 6 months, she said. "And because I had already decided, 6 months before I found it, that I was going to find it eventually. I had been building toward it." She looked at him. "Not consciously, but the cross-reference logs I ran, the access documentation, the encrypted drive, though those were not random. They were preparation for something I had understood was probably there." She stopped. "I am telling you this because you said you trusted me, and I want you to know that the decision I made was not entirely a moral one. It was partly something I had been building toward without fully admitting it." Lucien looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. She blinked. "You know, I knew about the cross-reference logs," he said. "Not their contents, but the fact that you were running them. Voss flagged it to me 4 months ago. Not as a concern, as a notation." He held her gaze. "I told him to let you work." She sat with this. "You knew I was watching." "I knew you were being thorough," he said, "which is what I hired you to be." A pause. "And I knew that if there was something to be found, you would find it." "You were using me to find it." "No." He said it without hesitation. "I didn't know there was something to find. I knew you were the kind of person who would find something if it existed. That's different." She looked at him. She thought about the difference between those two things and concluded that it was real, and that he was right to distinguish them, and that the distinction mattered to her in a way she had not expected it to. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. The coffee was cooling. She drank the rest of it anyway. Outside the atrium window, the sky was beginning the first stages of its change. Not light yet, not light for another hour, but the absolute black of 4 in the morning giving way to something fractionally less absolute, the suggestion of eventual morning rather than the thing itself. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Oso. A single line. Carver's lawyer arrived. He stopped talking. She showed the phone to Lucien. He read it, and his expression did not change on the surface, which meant it was changing underneath in ways she was learning to read. "He'll talk again," Lucien said. "When his lawyer explains his options." "Yes." He looked into the phone a moment longer. "What Carver knows is enough to confirm the structural documentation you compiled. The lawyer will understand that cooperation has a better outcome than non-cooperation, and Carver will understand whatever his lawyer tells him to understand." He handed the phone back. "The question is the 940. Carver knows the holding company and the secondary structure," Elena said, but Price kept the jurisdiction routing from him because she needed him operational, not informed. What he knows confirms the entity. It doesn't locate the money. She looked at the laptop. "The jurisdiction routing is in the documentation I pulled from the server architecture during the recovery mapping at 3 a.m. I have the pathway. I have the holding entity names. What I don't have is the specific account identifiers at the receiving end, because Price would have changed those in the last 48 hours when she understood the net was closing." "Can you reconstruct them?" "I can narrow the field," she said. "The jurisdiction she routed through has a limited number of receiving institutions that handle this class of transfer. If I cross-reference the transfer timestamps with the known operational windows of those institutions, I can identify which one processed the transfer and request the account information through the appropriate channels. She paused. It will take time. It will require cooperation from the jurisdiction's regulatory body, which may or may not be forthcoming, and it will require the organization's formal involvement in the recovery request, which means which means some degree of exposure, he said. Yes. He was quiet. It's your call, she said. I can tell you the probability of recovery under each approach. I can't tell you which risk is more acceptable to you. He looked at her. Give me the probability. If we pursue formal recovery channels in the next 72 hours, probability of recovering at least part of the 940 is approximately 55%. The exposure risk is moderate. The recovery request will be processed through financial crime channels, which are not public, but they create a record. She held his gaze. If we do not pursue formal channels, the probability drops to under 20% over the following 30 days as the money moves deeper into the receiving structure and the trail gets colder. And if we don't recover it? The organization absorbs a net loss of $328,000, she said, after the 2.2 from the freeze and whatever we get back through Carver's cooperation, which is, she paused, not nothing, but it's manageable. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him run his own arithmetic, not financial, the other kind, the calculus of risk and exposure and what he was willing to put on the table to recover what had been taken from him. She watched him work through it the way she watched everything he did that was internal, carefully, without intruding on it. Pursue the formal channels, he said, but route the request through the legitimate portfolio operations. Use the commercial vehicle arm as the filing entity rather than the primary organization. She thought about this. That works if the commercial vehicle has documented business relationships in the relevant jurisdiction. It does. Then yes, she said. That threads the needle. She opened the laptop. I'll start the documentation for the filing tonight. By 7, I should have a preliminary package ready. You said 7 was for rest. 7 was for starting the mapping, she said. The filing documentation is different. I can do that now. She looked at him. I'll sleep when the 72 hours are up. He looked at her for a long moment. The look had all the gradations she had learned to read, and underneath all of them was the one she had stopped trying not to see. The one that was not professional and not tactical, and not the way a man looked at an asset he was protecting. I'll stay, he said. She looked at him. While you work, he said, I have calls to make. I'll make them from here. She held his gaze for a moment that was longer than necessary for the exchange of information. Then she turned to the laptop and opened the filing documentation template and began to work. And behind her, Lucien made his calls in the low voice she had come to know, and the residence room settled into its working quiet, and outside the atrium window the sky continued its slow progress toward morning. And Elena Ashcroft typed with steady hands in the almost light of a night that had cost more than she had budgeted for and had not yet finished settling its accounts. And she did not look at the shelf because the shelf was empty now, and the door that had been cracking open for months was open, and the air coming through it was the cold, particular air of a life that was about to be larger than she had allowed herself to believe she was permitted to have. And she was not ready for it, and she was going to have it anyway, because the arithmetic on that particular question had finally, after a very long time, come out right. The filing documentation took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Elena knew this because she had looked at the clock when she started, 5 minutes past 5 in the morning, and she looked at it again when she typed the final confirmation reference into the submission package, and the timestamp read 9:16. In between those two fixed points, the room had changed around her without her fully registering the change. The sky outside the atrium window had moved from the suggestion of morning to actual morning, pale and then golden, and then the ordinary working light of a day that did not know or care what had preceded it. Voss had appeared at some point with food she had eaten without tasting. Lucien had made calls and received calls, and at some point had stopped making them, and had simply been present in the room in the way he was present in rooms, completely without waste, occupying space with the particular economy of a man who had learned that stillness was its own form of communication. She submitted the package at 9:17. She leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling and let herself feel, for exactly 10 seconds, the specific quality of having finished a thing that had needed finishing. Then she straightened up and looked at Lucien. He was watching her from the second chair. He had not slept. She could see the evidence of it in the set of his face. Not deterioration, not in a man with his discipline, but a thinning of the controlled surface that came with sustained effort over too many hours. The specific transparency that exhaustion produced in people who did not usually allow transparency. "It's filed," she said. "I know. I watched you file it." The regulatory body in the jurisdiction has a 48-hour acknowledgement window. After acknowledgement, the formal request goes to the receiving institution. Timeline from there depends on their cooperation protocols. She looked at the laptop. Best case, we have account identification within 5 business days. Worst case, 3 weeks. And the recovery probability you gave me earlier? Still 55%, she said. Filing the package correctly and within the window improves it to 58. She paused. I filed it correctly. Something moved in his face. The precursor, again. She was beginning to understand that this was simply how it looked on him. Not the expression itself, but the moment before it, the almost there quality that was perhaps more honest than the expression would have been. Yes, he said. You did. The room was quiet. Outside the atrium, the morning was fully established. Pigeons moving along the ledge of the building across the way with their purposeful, bobbing indifference to everything that was not immediately beneath their feet. She watched them for a moment, thought about the fact that she had been awake for, she counted backward, approximately 28 hours, with the exception of the 3 hours that may or may not have constituted sleep the previous night. Thought about the arm, which was informing her of its existence with increasing insistence. I need to tell you something, Lucien Miss said. She looked at him. Carver, he said. He started talking again at 6 this morning. His lawyer advised cooperation. He held her gaze. What he gave us was more than I expected. He had documentation of his own, records he had kept as insurance, the same instinct Price had, both of them building their exit archives in parallel without knowing the other was doing it. A pause. His documentation includes the jurisdiction routing for the 940, not the specific account identifiers, but the routing pathway, which, combined with what you have in the filing package, narrows the receiving institutions from a field of several dozen to a field of 3 or 4, Elena said. Yes. She turned back to the laptop. I can amend the filing package before the acknowledgement window opens. If I add the routing pathway from Carver's documentation as supplemental evidence, the request becomes targeted rather than general. The receiving institution identification moves from 5 business days to probably 48 hours. She was already typing. Send me what Carver gave you. Elena. His voice was the version that stopped her. She looked up. It's 9:20 in the morning, he said. You've been working for 28 hours. The amendment window closes at end of business today, he said, which is 7 hours from now. She looked at him. Eat something that isn't what Voss left 2 hours ago, he said. Sleep for 3 hours. Come back and amend the filing. He held her gaze. The window will still be open. She sat with this. She ran the arithmetic. Not the filing arithmetic, but the other kind. The calculation she had been running since before she could remember running it. The one that measured available resources against required output and determined the minimum allocation necessary for continued function. The calculation that had produced the stitching at 2 in the morning, the 4:15 submissions, the 6 weeks of cross-reference logs on top of a full workload, the accumulated architecture of a life managed at minimum viable self-maintenance. She looked at the calculation and she looked at him, and she thought about the conversation in the garage. I've spent a long time managing exactly how much space I take up. And she thought about the fact that the shelf was empty and the door was open, and the person sitting across from her was not asking her to be less than she was. He was asking her to be enough to continue. 3 hours, she said. 3 hours, he confirmed. She closed the laptop. She stood, and the movement produced a comprehensive audit from her body of every system that had been running on override since the previous morning. Legs, back, the arm, the specific deep ache of 28 hours of sustained analytical effort that lived behind her eyes and at the base of her skull. She registered all of it the way she registered account discrepancies, noted, logged, to be addressed. She looked at the second chair, the one Lucien had been occupying for 4 hours, and then at the narrow bed in the residence room's sleeping area that she had not used. The chair can't have been comfortable, she said. It wasn't, he said. There's a couch in the secondary office on 37. I know. You could have used it. I know, he said again. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the full, unmanaged quality of a man who had made a choice and was not going to obscure the making of it. He had stayed in the room because he had wanted to be in the room. And the reason he had wanted to be in the room was the reason she had stopped pretending she didn't understand. And the space between them in the morning light of the 38th floor residence held both of these facts without requiring either of them to perform anything about it. She went to sleep. 3 hours and 12 minutes later, she woke up, which was close enough, and she got up and washed her face and redressed the arm with the last of the medical kit supplies and went back to the desk and amended the filing package with the routing pathway from Carver's documentation, which Lucien had sent to her secure address while she slept. The amendment took 1 hour and 40 minutes. She submitted it at 2:14 in the afternoon, well inside the window. Then she went to find Lucien. He was on the 37th floor in the secondary office, and he was not alone. Oso was there, with the cut above his eyebrow finally properly dressed. Someone had done it while Elena slept, the butterfly strips neat and parallel. And a man she had seen twice before whom she now understood to be the organization's primary legal contact. A compact man in his 60s named Oral, who had the eyes of someone who had spent 40 years in rooms where nothing was what it appeared and had made his peace with this. They were looking at a document on the desk, and when Elena came in, all three of them looked at her, and Aurel looked at her for a moment with an expression that she could not immediately classify. "Ms. Ashcroft," he said, "I've been reviewing your filing package. And? It's exceptional work." He said it the way a doctor said a test result, informationally, without theater. "The supplemental routing evidence is particularly strong. You've given the regulatory body very little room to decline the request." He paused. "I have some questions about the methodology you used to access the dead drop server." She looked at him, then at Lucien. Lucien's expression said, "I told him what was necessary." "Ask them," she said. Oral asked them. They were precise questions, the questions of a man who needed to understand not just what had been done, but how it had been done, and whether it could be defended. And Elena answered them with the same precision, and at the end of the exchange, Oral was quiet for a moment, and then said, "The access was unauthorized under the letter of the relevant statutes. However, the file deleted was itself the product of criminal activity, specifically, the unauthorized copying and intended distribution of proprietary financial documentation obtained through a criminal conspiracy. There is a reasonable argument that the deletion constituted remediation of an ongoing criminal act rather than commission of a separate offense." He paused again. "It's not airtight." "No," Elena said, "but it's better than the alternative." Which was allowing the disclosure to proceed. "Which was allowing the disclosure to proceed," she confirmed. Aurel looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Lucien in the particular way of a lawyer looking at a client when the client has acquired something that the lawyer had not previously accounted for. "I'll prepare a supplemental brief," he said, "in the event it's needed." He gathered his documents. He left. Also left shortly after, with the brief nod of a man who communicated in the language of necessary acknowledgement and considered anything beyond that an extravagance. Elena watched him go and thought about the garage and the dented sedan and the cut above his eye. And she thought about the particular kind of loyalty that expressed itself in staying in the fight rather than in anything said about it. She and Lucien were alone in the room. She sat in the chair across from his desk. The afternoon light was different from the morning light. Warmer, more direct, coming through the windows at an angle that showed the dust in the air and the slight imperfection in the window glass, and all the ordinary textures of a room that was used and real. "The amendment's in," she said. "I saw. Oral's brief will cover the server access if it comes up." "Yes. The Carver Cooperation Agreement. Oral will need to formalize that before the regulatory body's acknowledgement comes through, so the routing pathway evidence has clear provenance." She looked at him. "That's probably a 48-hour task." "Oral knows," Lucien said. "He's already started it." She nodded. She looked at the window. She thought about the things that were finished and the things that were still moving and the distinction between them, which was the distinction between what she could control and what she had set in motion and now had to allow to move at its own speed through systems and processes that would not hurry for her. "Price," she said. "Yes." "What happens to her?" She paused. He was quiet for a moment. Not the deciding kind of quiet. The thing had already been decided. She understood that. The kind of quiet that preceded saying a thing out loud for the first time. "She'll be moved," he said. "Out of the city. Out of the country. Eventually. There are people who handle this kind of thing. She won't be in a position to do what she did again." He looked at Elena. "She won't be in a position to do much of anything." Elena held his gaze. She thought about Price in the garage, the composure, the small canister, the prepared secondary exit, the 9 years of accumulated institutional knowledge weaponized against the institution that had housed it. She thought about the photograph, the message from Price's own contact number, deliberate and personal. "You should have stayed on the 4th floor." She thought about what staying on the 4th floor would have looked like. The corner desk, the careful distance. The circle kept small enough that breakdowns could be managed without witnesses. She was not going to mourn Price's outcome. She was also not going to pretend the outcome was clean. "The 940,000, she said. "We'll get most of it back." "Probably." She paused. "The 300 and some that we don't. That's the cost of the 8-minute gap." "Yes, that's on me," she said. He looked at her. "No." "The schema was in the documentation I compiled. If I had mapped the secondary liquidation pathway completely in the initial pass..." "Elena." His voice was flat and final. "You compiled 22 pages of documentation in one night on a system that you were not authorized to audit, on a scheme that had been running for 2 years without detection, while managing the daily workload of your position. The 8-minute gap is the gap between when I put people in position and when Price moved. That's an operational failure, not an analytical one." He held her gaze. "It's on me." She looked at him. She thought about the arithmetic of blame, which was a calculation she was familiar with. The impulse to absorb responsibility as a form of control, because if the failure was hers, then the next failure could be prevented by being better, and being better was something she knew how to aim at. She thought about the fact that he was right. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. The afternoon settled around them. She became aware of the specific quality of tiredness she was in. Not the acute exhaustion of the previous night, but something deeper, the settling tiredness that came after sustained effort when the effort was finally structurally over. Not the work. The work would continue. There was always work. But the specific shape of crisis that had begun with a photograph and a number on a screen and a woman in a sub-level garage with a secondary exit planned, that shape was resolved. The remaining pieces were process, and process was something she understood how to inhabit without burning the way she had been burning. "There's something I haven't told you," Lucian said. She looked at him. "The cross-reference logs," he said. "The ones Voss flagged 4 months ago. The reason I told him to let you work." He was looking at her with the direct, unsparing attention she had been learning to receive without looking away from. "4 months before you found the discrepancy, I had begun to suspect there was something wrong in the accounts. Not specifically, not anything I could point to. An instinct, the kind that came from watching money move for 20 years and recognizing when the movement had a quality it shouldn't have." He paused. "I had asked Voss to watch for any analyst who began running non-standard queries, not to interfere, just to watch." Elena was very still. "You were the only one," he said. "In 4 months, you were the only person on the 4th floor or above it who ran a non-standard query without being asked to." She processed this. "You were waiting for someone to find it. I was waiting to see if anyone would." He held her gaze. "There's a difference." She thought about this difference. It was the same distinction he had made earlier, not using her to find it, but knowing she would find it if it existed. It was a real distinction, and it was also, she understood, a distinction that said something specific about what he had seen in her and when he had seen it and what he had done with what he saw. "You could have told me," she said, 4 months ago. "You could have brought me in and told me what you suspected and asked me to look." "Yes," he said. "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because telling you would have told you what I suspected existed," he said. "And what you found by looking without knowing what you were looking for is more complete than what you would have found looking for a specific thing." He paused. "And because I wanted to see what you would do when you found it." She looked at him. You wanted to see if I would come to you? Yes. That's a significant test to run on a person without their knowledge. Yes, he said again, without deflection and without apology, in the same way he said everything that was true. She thought about this for a long time. She thought about the one in the morning and the encrypted drive and the 22 pages and the decision she had made that she had described to him honestly, not purely moral, not heroic, the decision of a person who had been building towards something without fully admitting it. She thought about Voss appearing beside her desk and the 15-minute request and the executive floor at 11:15 and the first aid kit on the desk, and Lucien saying, sleeve in the flat, non-negotiable voice that she had understood even then was not cruelty, but a specific kind of directness that she had no word for because she had not encountered it before in that register. I came to you, she said. You did. And if I hadn't, he held her gaze, then I would have known something important. She understood what he meant. If she had closed the window and flagged it as a rounding error and gone to sleep, he would have known that she was not the person he had believed her to be. And the person he had believed her to be was the person she actually was. And the fact that he had seen it before she had fully seen it herself was something she was going to need to sit with for longer than this afternoon, in some quieter hour, and examine what it meant. She was already sitting with it. I came to you, she said again, not for his confirmation, for herself. You did, he said. She looked at the window. The light was moving. The afternoon was going to become evening at some point, and the evening was going to become the first night of whatever came after this, and she was going to need to decide at some point in the coming days what that looked like. The apartment on Delaney Street, with its rebuilt cabinet and fixed hinge, the fourth floor with its corner desk and 11-person professional landscape of carefully maintained distances. The shelf. The circle kept small by design. She thought about the offer she had not yet been formally made, but understood was coming, because she had read the signals in the access level and the secured office and the direct line and the amended role description that Voss had quietly sent to her building email at some point in the previous week. She had read them and she had not responded to them because there was a part of her that had been trained by years of living at minimum viable self-maintenance to believe that reading a signal and responding to it were two different risks, and the second one was the larger one. Lucien, she said. He waited. The office, she said. The secured one on this floor, the direct line. Yes? That's a permanent arrangement, if you want it to be. She looked at him. At the face that gave almost nothing away and had been giving her, in gradation she had learned to read like account structures. Quite a lot. I want to know the terms, she said. Not the salary, the terms. What you're asking me to be responsible for, and what authority comes with it, and what the boundaries of the role are. She paused. I don't step into things without understanding their structure. Something happened in his face that was not the precursor this time. It was the thing itself. Brief, unguarded. The specific expression of a man who has encountered something that pleases him in a way he was not quite prepared for. He contained it in under a second, but she had seen it and she was going to catalog it, and it was going in the part of the ledger that she had stopped pretending was purely professional. I'll have Oral draft the terms document, he said. I'll read it completely. I know you will. She nodded. She moved to stand and the arm reminded her of itself with a sharp specificity that made her breath catch. Just briefly, just for a moment, the kind of involuntary response that happened before the management system engaged. She controlled it before it fully registered. Not quite before. His expression shifted. The arm, he said. It's fine. Elena, it held through the night. The dressing is clean. She looked at it. It needs to be properly looked at by an actual medical professional at some point in the next day or two, but it's not urgent. Today, he said. Lucien, I'll have someone come here. He picked up his phone. Today. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the first aid kit on the desk in his office, weeks ago. The scissors and the antiseptic and the dressing applied with the focus of a man for whom this was not the first time and was not without its cost. She thought about what it had meant and what she had done with what it meant, which was to put it on the shelf with everything else and continue working. The shelf was empty. All right, she said. Today. He made the call. She sat back down, not because she needed to sit, but because leaving the room felt suddenly like leaving before a thing was finished. And the thing that was not finished was not the filing or the amendment or the recovery request or oral's brief. Those things were process. They would complete themselves in the ordinary rhythm of time and institutional machinery. The thing that was not finished was this. This room, this afternoon, the two of them on opposite sides of a desk with the morning's work done and the evening not yet started, and the particular quality of light that existed between those two things, honest and specific and without ceremony. She looked at him. He was looking at her. "The engagement," she said. He was quiet. "I'm not asking you to account for it," she said. "I told you that before." "I know. I'm asking—" She stopped. She found the actual sentence, the one underneath the one she was performing. "I'm asking if you're all right." He looked at her with the expression that was not the precursor, and was not the controlled surface, and was not the tactical stillness. It was the third thing, the one she had seen in the 37th floor office when the weight had moved through the surface briefly in the hour after Price's name was confirmed, and she had watched him absorb what 16 years of misplaced trust felt like from the inside. It wasn't... He stopped. He tried again. "We built something that looked like what it was supposed to look like," he said. "For a long time, we both understood that was what it was. She deserved more than that." He looked at the desk. "She'll have more than that now." Elena looked at him. She thought about the architecture of appearances, the engagement built for function rather than truth, the organization's legitimate face covering its actual structure, the professional distance she had maintained for 2 years and 8 months, because distance was what she knew how to build and maintain and inhabit. She thought about the things that looked like what they were supposed to look like, and the things that simply were what they were. She thought about the stovetop coffee pot packed by people she hadn't asked. "Yes," she said. "She will." He looked up at her. "And you," she said. She held his gaze across the desk in the afternoon light, in the room that smelled like old decisions and strong coffee and the particular clean chemical smell of the building's ventilation. And she said it without managing it, without the careful professional distance, without the apparatus of self-protection she had built and maintained and was now, in pieces, setting down. "You deserve more than that, too." The room was very still. Lucien looked at her for a long moment, the full, complete look, the one that did not ration itself or choose what to show. And what was in it was the thing she had been watching approach for weeks, arriving now, without ceremony, in an afternoon office, with bad light and files on the desk, and both of them running on inadequate sleep and the residue of a night that had cost more than either of them had budgeted for. It was not the version that lived in easier circumstances. It was this version, real and specific, and without any of the surfaces that usually stood between people and what they actually felt. "I know," he said, the way he said everything that was true. The doctor came at 5:30, a quiet woman in her 40s who did not ask questions beyond the clinical ones, and examined the wound with the clean, efficient attention of someone who had seen worse and was not wasting her focus on the circumstances surrounding what she was treating. She declared the stitching sound, which Elena noted produced a very specific reaction in Lucien that he did not display and that she catalogued anyway. The doctor redressed the arm properly, left supplies, and gave instructions that Elena listened to completely and intended to follow, which was itself a change from the version of herself who had packed surgical thread in a bathroom drawer and called it preparation. After the doctor left, Voss appeared with food that was actual food, not the previous offering, something substantial, the kind that Voss produced when he had decided a situation required more than gesture. He set it on the desk between the two chairs with the quiet competence of a man who had been managing the logistics of Lucien Armand's life for long enough to understand what each situation required, and had decided this situation required feeding. Elena looked at the food. She looked at Voss. "Thank you," she said. Voss nodded. He looked at her for a moment with the same quality of peripheral attention she had been observing in him for weeks, and now understood was not wariness, but the specific form of protectiveness that long-term loyalty produced in people who expressed loyalty through action rather than statement. He left. She and Lucien ate in the secondary office with the files still on the desk, and the evening light replacing the afternoon light, and the city going about its indifferent business beyond the windows. They did not talk much. What they said was practical. The timeline for the regulatory response, the Carver Cooperation Agreement, the question of the fourth floor, and the 11 people who worked on it and what they knew and what they had been told about the events of the preceding days. Practical things. The kind that kept hands and minds occupied while something else settled quietly into place without being forced. She finished eating. She looked at the window. The light was almost gone now, the specific blue-gray of a city evening that was neither day nor night, but the honest threshold between them. "I'm going back to Delaney Street tonight," she said. He looked at her. "The building is clear," she said. "Price is handled. Ariel is handled. The remaining exposure is process, not threat." She met his eyes. "I need to go back to my apartment." He was quiet for a moment. "All right. Not because—" She stopped. Tried again. "I'm not going back because I want to put distance between what happened and what's next," she said. "I'm going back because I need to stand in my own kitchen for a while, in the space that got rebuilt." She looked at him. "Do you understand that?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I'll be back tomorrow at 7, she said. "Orel's terms document should be ready by then. I'll read it in the morning and we can discuss it in the afternoon." He nodded. She stood. She collected her laptop bag, her drive, the files she had been building during the amendment process. She put on her coat, the same one she had been wearing since the previous morning, which she was going to put directly in the washing machine when she got home, which was a thought so ordinary it felt almost dissonant in the context of the last 30 hours. She walked to the door. She stopped. "Lucien." He looked up from the desk. She thought about the first aid kit, the rebuilt cabinet, the question that was not a question. When did that happen? And the space he had given her rather than the pity she would have refused. She thought about the 17 flights of stairs and the garage and the server and the delete confirmation and the filing package and 3 hours of sleep in a residence room while he stayed in the second chair and made calls in the low voice she had come to know. She thought about the ledger. Not the organization's ledger, her own. The private accounting of what had been given and what had been taken and what the current balance was. She had been keeping this ledger her whole life, and it had always come out to the same number, a small, manageable deficit, carefully controlled, never allowed to grow large enough to become a problem. She looked at the number and found it was different now. "Thank you," she said. Not for any specific thing, for the sum of things, which was larger than any individual item in it and could not be accounted for line by line. He looked at her. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "I will," she said. She went down in the elevator, standing with her back against the wall, watching her reflection in the polished metal doors the way she had on a different evening, a different version of the same building, a different version of herself. The woman in the reflection had the same face, the same coat, the same bag, the same left arm, with its new clean dressing under the sleeve. The same eyes, different things in them. The lobby at 7 in the evening was not the lobby at 7 in the morning. The chignon receptionist had gone home. The ambient climate-controlled air still smelled like leather. The marble floors caught the overhead lights in the same way they always did. She crossed them and went through the glass doors, and the city received her with its complete, unconcerned indifference, traffic and street noise, and the smell of a summer evening in a place that did not stop moving for anyone. She walked to the transit stop. She took the train to Delaney Street. She let herself into the building and up the stairs and into the apartment, and she stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark before she turned the lights on. Then she turned them on. The kitchen was exactly as she had left it. The rebuilt cabinet, solid and level, the fixed hinge on the bathroom door, the crack behind the stove, no longer stuffed with a paper towel, the stovetop coffee pot on the counter. She had brought it back from the 38th floor in her bag, a small, deliberate act of reclamation. She set the laptop bag on the table and went to the kitchen and filled the pot and set it on the burner. She stood at the counter while the water heated and she looked at the cabinet. She had stood here before, the evening after the men had come to fix it, and she had stood here longer than she meant to and had not been able to say what she was feeling except that the solidness of the cabinet was not what was making her feel it. She understood now what she had been feeling. She had been feeling the specific disorienting sensation of being seen by someone who had not been asked to see her, who had seen her and done something about what they saw without making her feel diminished by the being seen. She had not known what to do with it then. She was not certain she knew now, but she was less afraid of not knowing than she had been. The coffee was ready. She poured it. She carried it to the desk, her desk, in her apartment, with her second-hand lamp, and the crack in the wall that was no longer cracked and the window that looked onto the street below where ordinary people were living ordinary lives with ordinary problems that she had once envied without fully admitting the envy. She sat. She did not open the laptop. She drank the coffee and she looked at the window and she listened to the street sounds and she let herself be still in a space that was hers in the simple, uncomplicated sense of the word. Not the 38th floor residence, not the secured office with the direct line, not any of the various positions she had occupied in the last 30 hours in relation to other people and their crises. Just here. Just her. Just the coffee and the window and the cabinet that was solid and level and exactly where it was supposed to be. She thought about the terms document that Oral was drafting. She thought about what it would mean to read it and sign it and step fully into the thing she had been building toward without admitting she was building toward it. The authority and the exposure and the work that she was genuinely exceptional at and had been for a long time without anyone, including herself, giving it the full weight it deserved. She thought about what it meant to work for an organization whose nature she understood and had never pretended not to understand, and whether the ledger she kept on that understanding was a ledger she could continue to live inside of. She had been living inside it for 2 years and 8 months. She had made her peace with the shape of it in those 2 years and 8 months, not because the shape was comfortable, but because the alternative shapes available to her had their own costs, and she had assessed them and chosen accordingly. She thought about price, about what 9 years of intimacy with a system looked like when the intimacy soured, about the question she had not asked and did not intend to ask, which was whether the same mathematics that had produced price could produce her, given enough time and enough pressure and enough accumulated grievance. She sat with this for a while. She did not look away from it. She concluded, in the quiet of the apartment on Delaney Street with the coffee cooling in her hands, that the difference was not moral certainty. She was not a person who trafficked in moral certainty. It was too expensive and too fragile, but something simpler and harder to name. Price had wanted out, had been building toward out for years, the exit architecture erected alongside the performance of commitment. Elena had never built toward out. She had built toward something, in the cross-reference logs and the encrypted drive, and the preparation that was not about the money, but about the system and the understanding of it. And what she had been building toward was not exit, but deeper in. She did not know exactly what that said about her. She suspected it said that she was in some fundamental way she had not previously been required to acknowledge, committed to something. Not loyalty in the abstract, not to an organization whose operation she understood clearly, but to the specific, intractable human problem of things being what they were supposed to be. Numbers that added up. Accounts that balanced. The 0.003% that mattered, because the things that seemed too small to matter were always the ones that held the most weight. She had spent her life attending to the 0.003% in various forms. She did not intend to stop. She finished the coffee. She washed the cup, actually washed it, with soap, at the sink, in the way she sometimes didn't when she was running on minimum viable maintenance. She dried it. She put it in the cabinet, the solid, level, rebuilt cabinet that was exactly where it was supposed to be. She went to bed before 10 o'clock, which was earlier than she had gone to bed and longer than she could accurately calculate. She lay in the dark and she listened to the street and she felt the arm, which ached in the deep, healing way rather than the sharp, informational way. And she thought about tomorrow and what it contained. The terms document, the afternoon conversation, the 72-hour window on the recovery filing that was already in motion through systems that would process it at their own pace and return a result she would deal with when it arrived. She thought about Lu Shen in the second chair, in the low light of the residence room at 5 in the morning, making calls in the voice she had come to know while she built a filing package that was going to recover most of what had been taken, and the specific quality of his presence in that room, which was not surveillance and was not management and was not the thing she had originally understood his attention to be, which was evaluation. It was simply someone being there. She had not had that in a long time, longer than she could accurately calculate, which was itself the answer to a question she had been not asking for years. She did not reach for the shelf. The shelf was empty. She did not look at the door because the door was open and the air coming through it was what it was. And she was going to walk through it at 7 tomorrow morning and read a terms document and have a conversation in the afternoon and do her work and continue doing her work and find out, in the ordinary, accumulating way that things were found out, What was on the other side? Sleep came. She let it. The street outside went on about its business. The cabinet stood solid in the kitchen. The scar on her arm would be there in the morning. Smaller than it was, cleaner than it had been, the record of a night she had spent alone doing the next thing because the next thing was all there was. She would roll up her sleeve and look at it the way she looked at everything that had happened and been survived, which was with the flat, clear-eyed acknowledgement of a woman who had learned that survival was not the same as living, but was the beginning of it, and that the distance between the two was shorter than she had spent a very long time believing. In the morning she would get up. She would make coffee. She would go back to the work in the building and the person who had said come back tomorrow with the simplicity of a man who said what he meant and meant what he said and did not offer things he did not intend to follow through on. She would go back. And the going back would not be the same as every other going back. The returning to the corner desk, the maintained distance, the circle kept small, because the person going back was not the same person, and the thing she was going back to was not the same thing, and the ledger she kept on all of it had a different number in it now, not a deficit, for the first time in longer than she could accurately calculate, not a deficit.